When a tourist decided to throw hot tea at a royal guard to gain social media fame, his perfect prank backfired spectacularly when the guard's lightning-quick reflexes and ice-cold response turned him into the most humiliated visitor in Windsor Castle history. Here's the incredible story that shocked millions and became a powerful lesson about respect, tradition, and consequences. Dawn wrapped Windsor Castle in an ethereal embrace, painting the ancient stones in watercolor shades of amber and rose. The early February morning carried a distinctive winter bite, sending wisps of steam dancing from the heated sentry boxes that stood like faithful sentinels along the castle's East Terrace. This particular morning would become etched in the annals of royal guard history, though none of the early rising staff could have predicted how. The Victorian fountains sparkled with frost, their usually flowing waters frozen in mid-cascade, creating natural ice sculptures that caught the first rays of sunlight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Against this backdrop of frozen splendor, the East Terrace Garden stretched out like a sleeping giant, its perfectly manicured hedges dusted with crystalline frost, each breath of wind sending diamond-like sparkles into the crisp morning air. The geometric patterns of the formal garden, laid out in the 1820s during George IV's extensive renovations, created a stunning tapestry of white frosted green against the weathered stone paths. High above the terrace, perched atop the castle's eastern battlements, the Union Jack stirred lazily in the morning breeze, its colors rich against the pale winter sky. The flag's gentle movement was the only motion visible across the grounds, save for the measured patrol of a solitary figure whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. The ancient walls, having witnessed nearly a millennium of British history, seemed to stand even prouder in the crystalline morning light, their weather-worn stones telling silent stories of countless dawns just like this one. Staff Sergeant Alexander Crawford stood at his post with the kind of stillness that spoke of years of disciplined service. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a soldier who had earned every thread of his ceremonial uniform. The morning light caught the brass buttons of his black bearskin cap, creating small constellations against the dark fabric as he maintained his watch over the East Terrace. His ceremonial sword, polished to perfection, reflected the growing daylight like a beam of pure gold against his scarlet tunic. His service record read like a testament to excellence. 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he'd earned the Military Cross for exceptional bravery under fire, specialized training with the Special Air Service, and now the prestigious honor of guarding one of Britain's most treasured royal residences. The scarlet tunic of his No. 1 dress uniform stood out brilliantly against the weathered castle stones, each medal on his chest telling its own story of service and sacrifice. The most prominent among them, the Military Cross, caught the sunlight with particular brilliance, a reminder of the day he'd led his unit through an ambush to save wounded civilians. Crawford's journey to this position had been anything but ordinary. Born in a small village in the Scottish Highlands, he'd grown up hearing tales of his grandfather's service in the Queen's Guard during the 1960s. Those stories, told around peat fires on cold Highland nights, had planted the seeds of duty and honor that would later bloom into an exemplary military career. Now, standing watch over Windsor Castle, he was living those childhood dreams while adding his own chapter to the family legacy. The first tour groups wouldn't arrive for another hour, but already the castle staff moved with purpose through their morning routines. Gardens were inspected, pathways were swept, and security protocols were reviewed with clockwork precision. A pair of grounds workers nodded respectfully as they passed Crawford's post, their breath visible in the cold air as they went about their duties. One of them, an elderly gentleman who'd tended these gardens for over 4 decades, paused briefly to adjust a frost-covered topiary, his experienced hands working with gentle precision. The stillness of the morning carried a weight of anticipation, as if the very stones of Windsor Castle were holding their breath, waiting. The sun continued its slow climb, casting long shadows across the East Terrace that seemed to point toward Crawford's position like nature's own spotlight. His polished boots reflected the growing daylight, each one gleaming with a mirror finish that had taken hours of dedicated work to achieve. The previous evening, in the guards' quarters, he'd spent 3 hours alone on those boots, each stroke of the polishing cloth a meditation on the duty he was about to undertake. From his elevated position, Crawford could see the town of Windsor coming to life beyond the castle walls. Early morning commuters crossed the Thames on their way to London. Tourists began gathering at the castle gates, and shop owners in the royal borough prepared for another day of business in the shadow of nearly a millennium of history. The Great Western Railway line curled through the landscape like a black ribbon, carrying early morning trains whose windows caught the sunlight like falling stars. The serenity of the morning betrayed nothing of the chaos that would soon unfold. As the sun rose higher, warming the frozen grounds and beginning to thaw the fountain's icy decorations, there was no indication that this day would become one of the most viewed moments in modern Royal Guard history, or that Staff Sergeant Alexander Crawford's unwavering dedication to duty would soon be tested in a way that would captivate millions around the globe. A light breeze carried the distant sound of the changing of the guard at the main gate, the measured footsteps and crisp commands floating across the grounds like whispers from another time. Crawford remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward, embodying centuries of tradition in every perfectly maintained line of his stance. The morning light had now fully illuminated his post, making the scarlet of his uniform glow like a flame against the pale winter backdrop, a living symbol of the timeless dedication that protected these hallowed grounds. The castle's ancient clock tower struck 6, its deep resonant tones rolling across the frost-covered gardens. Each chime seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the castle, a sound that had marked time here since the days of Queen Victoria. As the echoes faded, they were replaced by the gentle cooing of wood pigeons roosting in the castle's Gothic spires and the distant murmur of the River Thames flowing past the castle's northern walls. Inside the nearby guard room, Crawford's fellow guardsmen were preparing for their own shifts, their movements precise and practiced. Each man knew their role in this centuries-old ceremony of protection, their dedication as unwavering as the castle walls themselves. The room buzzed with quiet efficiency, boots being polished to a mirror shine, uniforms being adjusted to perfection, weapons being inspected with meticulous care. The morning's security briefing had been routine, expected visitor numbers, scheduled tours, potential concerns. Nothing had hinted at the extraordinary events that would unfold later that day. The duty sergeant had mentioned an uptick in social media personalities visiting the castle, but such visitors had become commonplace in recent years. No one could have predicted how this ordinary observation would prove prophetic in the most dramatic way possible. As the morning progressed, the first hints of tourist activity began to stir beyond the castle gates. Camera lenses caught the early light, tour guides gathered their groups, and the daily rhythm of Windsor Castle began its familiar pattern. Yet this day would prove anything but familiar. In just a few hours, this peaceful corner of Windsor Castle would become the stage for an incident that would challenge not just one guard's composure, but the very notion of respect in our modern, social media-driven world. The East Terrace, with its pristine gardens and historic significance, would soon witness a confrontation between centuries-old tradition and contemporary arrogance that would leave an indelible mark on both. But for now, in these quiet morning hours, Staff Sergeant Alexander Crawford stood his watch, unknowing that his training, discipline, and lightning-fast reflexes would soon be tested in front of millions of online viewers. The stage was set, the players were assembling, and the morning's peaceful atmosphere was about to give way to one of the most memorable moments in recent Royal Guard history. A moment that would remind the world that behind the ceremonial uniforms and time-honored traditions stood real soldiers, trained professionals, whose commitment to duty was anything but an act for tourists' cameras. As the morning mist began to lift from Windsor Castle's grounds, Staff Sergeant Alexander Crawford's presence had already drawn the attention of the growing crowd. At 32, his bearing spoke of more than just military training. It revealed a man who had transformed discipline into an art form. Standing at 6'2", Crawford cut an imposing figure against the historic castle walls, his posture maintained with the kind of precision that made even veteran soldiers stand a little straighter in his presence. The morning sun now fully illuminated his position, highlighting every immaculate detail of his uniform. Each brass button gleamed like a freshly minted coin, while his white buff belt crossed his scarlet tunic at exactly the regulation angle of 45 degrees. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His bearskin cap, pristinely groomed and positioned with mathematical accuracy, added another 18 inches to his already commanding height. The morning light caught each metal on his chest, creating tiny constellations that told stories of valor in Afghanistan, exemplary service in peacekeeping missions, and distinguished conduct under fire. Behind Crawford's disciplined exterior lay a depth of experience that few tourists bothering to snap selfies could comprehend. Before joining the Queen's Guard, he'd served with distinction in the Royal Marines, completing 3 tours of duty and earning multiple commendations for bravery under fire. One particular incident in Helmand Province had earned him the Military Cross. During an ambush, he'd led his unit through heavy fire to rescue trapped civilians, displaying the kind of cool-headed courage that would later serve him well in a very different kind of confrontation. His journey to the Queen's Guard had been marked by exceptional achievement at every step. During selection, he'd broken records in both physical fitness and ceremonial drill, earning the rare distinction of outstanding candidate from his instructors. His commanding officer had noted in his final assessment, Staff Sergeant Crawford embodies the perfect balance of ceremonial precision and operational capability. His presence alone elevates the standards of those around him. The other guards often spoke of Crawford's legendary attention to detail. Each morning, he arrived 3 hours before his shift to prepare his uniform, spending a full hour alone on his boots until they reflected like black mirrors. His rifle drill was so precise that it was recorded for training purposes, showing new recruits what perfection looked like. Even his fellow guardsmen, themselves elite soldiers, regarded Crawford with a mixture of respect and awe. Despite his impressive credentials, Crawford carried himself with quiet humility. The son of a Highland shepherd, he'd grown up understanding the value of patient dedication and unwavering focus. These qualities, instilled during long days on the Scottish hills, had served him well through his military career, and now in his role guarding one of Britain's most precious historical treasures. On this particular morning, Crawford had assumed his post with the same meticulous attention he'd shown every day for the past 3 years. His eyes, though fixed forward in the traditional stance, missed nothing. Years of operational experience had honed his situational awareness to razor sharpness. He could track movement in his peripheral vision while maintaining the statue-like stillness that tourists found so fascinating. The weight of tradition sat comfortably on Crawford's shoulders. He understood that his role represented something far greater than himself. He was a living link in a chain of service stretching back centuries. Each precise movement, each moment of steadfast vigilance, honored not just the crown but every guard who had stood watch before him. His fellow guardsman, Lance Corporal James Mitchell, had once described Crawford's presence on duty. It's like watching history come alive. When Sergeant Crawford stands post, you don't just see a guard, you see every guard who's ever protected these walls. There's something timeless about his bearing that makes tourists lower their voices without being asked. The morning crowd had begun to swell, their excited chatter and camera clicks creating a familiar backdrop to Crawford's watch. Tour guides gestured toward him as they explained the traditions of the Queen's Guard to their groups. Children pointed and whispered, some trying to mimic his stance while their parents snapped photos. Through it all, Crawford maintained his position with unwavering precision, his discipline as solid as the castle walls themselves. Little did anyone know that this ordinary morning would soon test Crawford's training in ways no one could have anticipated. His experience in combat zones had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about the growing crowd's energy felt different today. There was an undercurrent of excitement that seemed to carry more than the usual tourist enthusiasm. As the sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the East Terrace, Crawford's highly trained senses began to register subtle changes in the crowd's behavior. More phones were being raised, more social media poses struck, and the whispers seemed to carry an edge of anticipation. Something was building, a tension in the air that his years of operational experience had taught him to recognize, but never ignore. The late morning sun had transformed Windsor Castle's East Terrace into a theater of tourist activity. The earlier frost had melted away, leaving the Victorian fountains sparkling under clear February skies. Tour groups moved in organized clusters across the ancient cobblestones, their guides' voices rising and falling in a familiar rhythm as they shared centuries of royal history with eager visitors from around the world. Staff Sergeant Crawford maintained his post as the daily routines of castle life unfolded around him. A group of Japanese tourists bowed respectfully before taking photos, their guide explaining in hushed tones about the significance of the Queen's Guard. American families posed at a respectful distance, parents teaching their children about the importance of tradition. European school groups sketched the architectural details of the castle, their art teachers pointing out the interplay of light and shadow on the ancient stones. The normal rhythm of a castle morning played out like a well-rehearsed symphony. Security personnel conducted their regular patrols, their movements subtle but purposeful. Gardeners tended to the immaculate terraced flower beds, preparing them for the upcoming spring season. The castle's domestic staff moved efficiently through their duties, their presence barely noticeable yet essential to the smooth operation of this living piece of history. A tour guide's voice carried clearly across the terrace. The Queen's Guard are serving members of the British military, chosen for their exemplary service records. This isn't just ceremony. These are highly trained soldiers. Her words drew appreciative nods from her group, who maintained a respectful distance as they photographed Crawford's impressive figure against the castle backdrop. The morning air carried the distant sounds of the changing of the guard ceremony at the main gate, its precision choreography drawing crowds of onlookers. The measured beat of boots on cobblestones, the sharp commands, and the metallic click of rifles being shouldered echoed across the grounds, sounds that had remained unchanged for centuries. Palace staff had noticed an increasing number of social media influencers visiting the castle in recent months. Most were respectful, content to pose for photos and share the castle's history with their followers. The palace had even established guidelines for social media coverage, encouraging visitors to share their experiences while maintaining the dignity of the historic site. A group of retired military veterans approached Crawford's post, their bearing revealing their own service history. They paused to admire his turnout, one elderly gentleman explaining to his grandchildren how the uniform had barely changed since his own service decades ago. "Look at those boots," he whispered proudly. "That's hours of work right there. That's dedication." The castle gift shop was doing brisk business, selling postcards and memorabilia featuring the iconic guards in their ceremonial uniforms. Children emerged clutching plastic bearskin caps and toy rifles, attempting to mimic the guards' famous stoic expressions. Their parents smiled indulgently, capturing these moments on their phones for family albums. Near Crawford's post, a professional photographer conducted a permitted photo shoot for a tourism magazine, carefully composing shots that captured the grandeur of Windsor Castle and its traditions. Her movements were deliberate and respectful, her assistant careful not to cross any barriers as they worked to capture the perfect image. The castle's official social media team was also active, documenting daily life within the historic walls. Their photographs and posts helped educate the public about the real purpose of the Queen's Guard, emphasizing that behind the ceremonial duties stood highly trained military professionals. They regularly shared stories about the Guard's military backgrounds and the rigorous selection process they underwent. Above the general murmur of tourist activity, tower bells marked the passing hours with their deep, resonant tones. The sound rolled across the grounds, momentarily hushing conversations as visitors paused to appreciate this timeless marker of castle life. Each chime seemed to reinforce the weight of history present in every stone and ceremony. Castle security maintained their vigilant but unobtrusive presence. Cameras monitored the grounds while uniformed and plainclothes officers patrolled regularly. They had developed a keen eye for potential troublemakers over the years, politely but firmly addressing any behavior that threatened to cross the line from enthusiasm to disrespect. A history professor led his university students through a detailed discussion of the castle's military heritage, pointing out how the ceremonial aspects of guard duty had evolved from practical defensive measures centuries ago. His students took notes, occasionally glancing up at Crawford's impressive figure as a living example of how tradition and active duty merged in the modern era. The morning continued its peaceful progression, each element of castle life playing its part in the daily pageant of history and ceremony. Yet beneath this seemingly routine surface, subtle changes were beginning to ripple through the crowd. More phones appeared, more whispers circulated, and an almost imperceptible shift in energy began to build, the calm before a storm that would soon test the very foundations of respect and tradition that Windsor Castle represented. The harmonious atmosphere of Windsor Castle's morning was about to be disrupted by the arrival of Tyler Brooks, a 23-year-old social media influencer whose TikTok account, Prankster King, boasted over 2 million followers. Dressed in designer streetwear that seemed deliberately out of place among the historic architecture, Tyler swaggered through the castle gates, his perfectly styled hair and expensive camera equipment marking him as someone who considered himself above the ordinary tourist crowd. Behind him trailed his usual entourage, Marcus Chen, his primary videographer and self-proclaimed prank architect, Sophie Wells, his social media manager who specialized in manufacturing viral moments, and James Buzz Thompson, whose role seemed to consist mainly of providing sycophantic laughter for Tyler's increasingly outrageous stunts. Each carried multiple cameras and phones ready to capture content from every possible angle. "Yo, what's up, Prankster Nation?" Tyler's voice carried across the terrace as he recorded his standard intro. "We're here at Windsor Castle, and today we're about to create the most epic royal guard prank ever." His designer sneakers squeaked against the ancient cobblestones as he performed an exaggerated spin for his camera, drawing disapproving glances from nearby visitors. Tyler's rise to social media fame had been meteoric and controversial. Starting with harmless pranks in his hometown of Los Angeles, he'd gradually escalated to more provocative content, each video pushing boundaries further than the last. His recent stunts had earned him both millions of views and multiple bans from public venues, but the attention only fueled his appetite for more shocking content. "The plan is genius," Marcus whispered, adjusting his camera settings. "Nobody's ever managed to make these guards break character. You'll be the first, and it'll blow up bigger than that fountain guy in Rome." He referred to Tyler's previous viral moment, where he'd jumped into a historic fountain wearing a Renaissance costume, a stunt that had earned him a hefty fine and a lifetime ban from the site. Sophie scrolled through her phone, monitoring their social media metrics. "We're already trending just from the teaser posts. Royal Guard Challenge is picking up steam. People are betting whether you can make them crack." Her fingers flew across the screen as she orchestrated their online presence, making sure their followers knew something big was coming. The group paused near a souvenir stand, where Tyler purchased a steaming cup of English breakfast tea, winking at the confused vendor. "Gotta stay authentic for the British audience, right?" He smirked, taking an exaggerated sip while Buzz recorded for their Instagram stories. "This is going to be historically good content." Their presence had already begun to draw attention. A small crowd of teenagers recognized Tyler, whispering excitedly and pointing their phones in his direction. This was exactly the audience reaction he craved. Young, impressionable followers who would help amplify whatever chaos he was about to create. He posed for a few quick selfies, his practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Remember, guys," Tyler addressed his growing audience through Marcus's camera, "we're about to witness a Prankster King exclusive. These guards think they're untouchable with their fancy hats and serious faces, but nobody's immune to the king of pranks." He adjusted his designer jacket, making sure the brand labels were visible for his sponsorship obligations. Sophie continued her running commentary on their social media engagement. "The live stream is already at 50,000 viewers, and we haven't even started. The algorithm's loving this." She gestured toward Staff Sergeant Crawford's position. "That's our target. Perfect lighting, great background, maximum visibility." As they made their way across the terrace, Tyler's demeanor shifted subtly. Those who knew him well recognized this change. It was the same look he got before his most controversial stunts. His casual swagger took on an edge of determination, his practiced smile hardening into something more calculated. This wasn't just about entertainment anymore. It was about conquest. "Did you see how many views that last Palace Guard video got?" Buzz chimed in, his voice eager with anticipation. "Some tourist just walked up to one, and it hit 10 million views. Imagine what your version will do. His sycophantic enthusiasm only fueled Tyler's growing sense of invincibility. The group positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter of Crawford's post, each taking up predetermined filming positions. They'd planned this moment carefully, studying other guard videos to determine the best angles, the optimal timing, the perfect approach to create maximum impact. Tyler's pranks might have seemed spontaneous to his viewers, but each one was choreographed like a small media production. "Money shot's going to be from this angle," Marcus muttered, framing Crawford through his professional camera. "When you do it, make sure you're facing slightly left. That's your best side, and the lighting's perfect right now." His experience in manufacturing viral moments was evident in every calculated detail. Tyler began his performance with the practiced ease of someone who had built a career on public disruption. Positioning himself near Crawford's post, he started his standard live-stream introduction, making sure to keep the guard's impressive figure in frame behind him. "What's up, Prankster Nation? Your boy's about to show these fancy palace guards how we do things back in LA." The initial crowd gathering around them was small but growing steadily. Tyler's presence had already attracted attention, with some tourists recognizing him from his previous viral stunts. Phones emerged from pockets and bags, their owners sensing the buildup to something noteworthy. The morning air hummed with anticipation as Tyler began his first attempts at provocation. "Hey, big guy," Tyler called out, his voice deliberately loud enough to carry across the terrace. "That hat looks pretty heavy. Must be weighing down your sense of humor." A few nervous laughs rippled through the gathering crowd, but most visitors shifted uncomfortably, sensing the disrespect in his tone. Crawford remained motionless, his disciplined stance unchanged, though a subtle tension appeared in his jaw. Marcus circled with his camera, capturing every angle of the unfolding scene. "Perfect, Tyler. Keep going. The lighting's incredible, and his shadows making these amazing shapes on the ground." The professional cinematographer in him couldn't help but appreciate the visual drama, even as the situation began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. Sophie monitored their live feed, calling out viewer statistics. "We're at 100,000 viewers now, and the numbers are climbing fast. The comments are blowing up." She scrolled through the rapid-fire reactions, cherry-picking the most encouraging ones to share. "They're loving it, Tyler. They want more." Encouraged by his online audience's response, Tyler escalated his performance. He began an exaggerated marching routine, deliberately mocking the precise movements of the Queen's Guard. His designer sneakers scraped against the ancient cobblestones as he paraded back and forth, each step an intentional caricature of military discipline. "Look at me, I'm so serious," he proclaimed in a fake British accent, drawing snickers from his entourage. "I've got a big fluffy hat and I can't move because tradition." Some younger tourists laughed, but their amusement felt forced, tainted by the growing discomfort in the air. Older visitors began to step away, shaking their heads in disapproval. A tour guide nearby paused her presentation, watching the scene with growing concern. She'd witnessed similar attempts at provocation before, but something about Tyler's calculated escalation felt different. She caught the eye of a nearby security officer, who had already begun moving discreetly closer to Crawford's post. "Yo, palace guy," Tyler continued, pulling out his phone to capture his own angle. "I heard these uniforms are from the dollar store. Is that true? Or did they at least spring for the premium costume shop?" His words carried an edge now, frustration building as Crawford maintained his professional composure. Buzz's laughter seemed more nervous than genuine as he added, "Maybe he's a robot. They probably upgraded from real guards to animatronics to save money." The joke fell flat, meeting with silence from the increasingly uncomfortable crowd. A mother pulled her young children away, whispering something about respect and proper behavior. An elderly couple in matching Royal British Legion badges looked on with evident disapproval, the gentleman's hand tightening on his walking stick. The atmosphere had shifted from tourist curiosity to collective embarrassment. "The comments are getting mixed," Sophie warned quietly, noting the changing tone of their live feed. "Some people are saying this isn't cool." But Tyler was too invested in his performance to heed the warning signs. His social media success had been built on pushing boundaries, and he wasn't about to stop now. Marcus continued filming, but had started to look uncomfortable. "Tyler, maybe we should," he began, but Tyler cut him off with a sharp gesture. The influencer's face had taken on a harder edge, his casual swagger morphing into something more aggressive, as his initial attempts at provocation failed to elicit a response. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tyler announced theatrically, pulling out his wallet, "I'll give £500 to anyone who can make this guy smile." The offer hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence rather than the excitement he'd expected. A few teenagers looked tempted but were quickly discouraged by the disapproving glares from surrounding adults. Marcus continued filming but had positioned himself farther back, as if trying to distance himself from what was unfolding. "Maybe we should try something else," he suggested quietly. But Tyler was already moving on to his next provocation. He began taking exaggerated selfies, deliberately pushing closer to the barriers with each shot. "Look at this guy's hat," Tyler mocked, his voice growing louder. "I bet it's not even real fur. Probably got it from a Halloween shop, right, buddy?" He turned to his audience, both online and in person. "What do you think, guys? Real bear or fake fur? Leave your comments below." The forced laughter from his entourage sounded hollow against the historic stones. A group of Japanese tourists bowed apologetically toward Crawford before quickly moving away from the scene. Their guide was speaking rapidly into her phone, presumably calling for assistance. The security officer had now been joined by two colleagues, their presence becoming more visible as the situation escalated. "Oh wait, I've got an idea," Tyler announced, reaching into his designer backpack. He pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, and the opening notes of "God Save the King" blasted out in a deliberately distorted version. Maybe some music will help him loosen up. The crude attempt at humor fell flat, meeting with visible winces from the crowd. An elderly veteran, his chest decorated with service medals, stepped forward from the gathering crowd. "Young man," he began, his voice steady but stern, "that uniform deserves your respect. The men who wear it." But Tyler cut him off with an exaggerated eye roll, turning back to his camera. "Look, guys, we've got a historic moment here." Tyler's voice had taken on a mocking tone. "Grandpa thinks standing still is a real job." The comment drew shocked gasps from the crowd. The veteran's face flushed red, but he maintained his dignity, stepping back as several other onlookers placed supportive hands on his shoulders. Crawford remained motionless, but those closest to him could sense a change in his presence. Though his eyes stayed fixed ahead, there was something in his stance that spoke of coiled energy rather than mere stillness. His grip on his rifle had tightened imperceptibly, the only visible sign that he was acutely aware of the escalating situation. "Maybe he's broken," Tyler continued, growing visibly frustrated by Crawford's unwavering composure. "Do we need to call technical support? Is there a reset button under that hat?" He mimed making a phone call, his actions becoming more exaggerated and aggressive. "Hello, Palace Maintenance. Your robot guard needs reprogramming." Sophie's warnings became more urgent. "Tyler, people are reporting the live stream. We're getting flagged for harassment." But her words were drowned out by the growing crowd noise and Tyler's increasingly theatrical performance. The situation had taken on a life of its own, drawing more spectators even as many tried to distance themselves from the spectacle. "I heard these guys train for months just to stand still," Tyler sneered, his frustration evident in every word. "Must be a really tough course. Did you graduate top of your class in doing nothing?" He turned to his camera again. "What do you think, Prankster Nation? Should we help wake him up?" The air seemed to crackle with tension as Tyler reached again into his backpack. The security officers had begun moving through the crowd, but they were still several rows back. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, as if nature itself was highlighting the mounting drama. As Tyler's provocations escalated, Brigadier General James Whitworth, retired, could no longer remain a silent observer. The decorated veteran who had spent 30 years in service, including multiple tours with the Queen's Guard, stepped forward from the crowd. His military bearing was evident despite his civilian clothes, his chest bearing a discreet Distinguished Service Order pin that spoke of valor under fire. "Young man, Whitworth's voice cut through Tyler's performance with the kind of authority that only decades of command can create. "I strongly suggest you reconsider your actions." His words, though measured, carried a weight that momentarily silenced even Tyler's most enthusiastic supporters. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the gravitas of this intervention. Tyler, initially startled by the interruption, quickly tried to incorporate this new development into his show. "Oh, look, everyone, we've got another character joining our little performance." He turned his camera toward Whitworth, clearly failing to recognize the significance of the older man's bearing or the medals partially visible beneath his jacket lapel. "That uniform you're mocking," Whitworth continued, his voice steady but carrying an edge of steel, "has been worn by soldiers who've given their lives in service to this country, men and women who've fought in every major conflict of the last century." He took another step forward, his presence commanding attention without effort. Sophie, still monitoring the livestream, noticed an immediate shift in the comments. "Tyler, people are asking who this guy is. I think he's someone important." She scrolled rapidly through the responses, her expression growing increasingly concerned. Some viewers are recognizing him. He's a decorated veteran. But Tyler, caught up in his performance and the adrenaline of the moment, failed to read the room. "Listen, Grandpa," he smirked. "This isn't the 1940s anymore. These guys are just tourist attractions now. It's not that serious." His words drew audible gasps from the crowd, and even Buzz stopped laughing, sensing they were crossing a dangerous line. Whitworth's next words were delivered with the precision of a military briefing. "That man you're attempting to provoke? He's not a tourist attraction. He's a combat veteran, like many who wear this uniform. These guards have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and conflicts you've only seen on your phone screen." His voice carried clearly across the now silent terrace. Several other veterans in the crowd had moved to stand near Whitworth, their own service evident in their bearing. One wore a Royal Marines tie, another the subtle pin of the parachute regiment. They formed an impromptu honor guard, their presence a silent rebuke to Tyler's disrespect. "The Queen's Guard isn't a social media playground," Whitworth continued, his eyes fixed on Tyler with the kind of stare that had once commanded battalions. "Every soldier standing watch here has earned that privilege through years of service and sacrifice. That uniform represents centuries of tradition, honor, and duty." Marcus had lowered his camera, his professional instincts telling him this was no longer the kind of content they should be capturing. "Tyler, maybe we should wrap this up," he suggested quietly. "This isn't going the way we planned." But Tyler was too invested in his performance to back down now. "Oh yeah," Tyler challenged, his voice betraying a slight tremor despite his bravado. "Well, times change, old man. Nobody cares about all that old-fashioned stuff anymore. We're here to make content to entertain people." He gestured to his phone, where comments were now streaming in at a furious pace. Whitworth's response was measured but forceful. "You speak of entertainment, but what you're doing isn't entertaining. It's disrespecting centuries of sacrifice. Each stone in this castle, each ceremony we maintain, carries the weight of history and the blood of those who defended it." A mother in the crowd used the moment to teach her young son, her words carrying in the tense atmosphere. "Listen carefully, darling. This is what real respect looks like." The boy nodded, his eyes wide as he looked between the veteran and the guard, understanding something profound despite his youth. "The Metropolitan Police take a very dim view of harassment of the Queen's Guard," Whitworth added, noting the approaching security officers. "As does the American Embassy, I might add. This isn't California, young man. There are real consequences for this behavior in Britain." Tyler's face flushed red with a combination of embarrassment and defiance. The veteran's words had struck a nerve, but rather than backing down, he chose to escalate further, a decision that would soon prove catastrophic for his social media career. His carefully maintained influencer persona cracked, revealing something uglier beneath the polished surface. "Consequences? Really?" Tyler's voice took on a sneering edge that made even his loyal followers uncomfortable. "I've got 2 million followers. I am the consequence." He spun around to face his live stream audience, arms spread wide in an exaggerated gesture. Look at all these dinosaurs trying to protect their precious traditions. Time to show them how we do things in 2025. Sophie's warnings became more urgent as she monitored the rapidly shifting online response. Tyler, we're losing viewers fast. The comments are turning against us. Even your regular supporters are saying this isn't cool. She held up her phone, trying to show him the flood of negative reactions, but Tyler angrily waved her away. Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, he announced, his voice taking on a theatrical quality that echoed off the ancient castle walls. These people think their fancy uniforms and old-fashioned rules matter in the age of viral content. Let's show them what really matters. He reached into his designer backpack, pulling out his recently purchased cup of tea with an ominous flourish. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Parents pulled their children back, tourists lowered their phones in disgust, and several people began urgently signaling to the security officers who were still making their way through the dense gathering. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable tension to genuine alarm. Brigadier General Whitworth stepped forward again, his voice carrying the full weight of his military authority. Son, think very carefully about your next action. You're about to cross a line you can't step back from. His words carried a warning that anyone with sense would have heeded, but Tyler was far beyond listening to reason. Oh, I'm thinking very carefully, Tyler mocked, taking a deliberate sip from the teacup while maintaining eye contact with the veteran. I'm thinking this is about to become the most viral moment in Royal Guard history. He turned back to his cameraman. Marcus, make sure you get this from every angle. This is going to blow up bigger than anything we've ever done. Marcus hesitated, his camera lowering slightly. Tyler, man, this isn't right. We should just... But Tyler cut him off with a sharp gesture. The professional videographer took a step back, his expression troubled as he watched his longtime collaborator spiral toward disaster. The old guard is about to meet the new guard, Tyler announced to his dwindling livestream audience. Time to wake up this palace puppet. He began shaking the teacup deliberately, the hot liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The morning sun caught the rippling surface, creating ominous patterns that seemed to presage the chaos to come. Staff Sergeant Crawford remained motionless at his post, but those with military experience could detect subtle changes in his bearing. His grip on his rifle had shifted imperceptibly, his weight balanced perfectly for whatever might come next. Though his eyes remained fixed ahead, there was a new intensity in his gaze, the focused awareness of a combat veteran assessing a threat. This is your final warning. Whitworth's voice cut through the tension. That's not just a uniform you're threatening to assault. It's a serving member of His Majesty's Armed Forces. The consequences will be severe. Several other veterans in the crowd had moved to flank him, their collective presence forming a silent wall of disapproval. Tyler's response was to laugh, but the sound was hollow, tinged with the desperation of someone who had committed too fully to back down. Consequences? Do you even know who I am? I'm Prankster King. I've got more influence than this entire castle. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the nervousness beneath his bravado. The security officers were now just meters away, but the crowd's density was slowing their approach. One of them spoke urgently into his radio, clearly calling for additional support. The morning air seemed to crackle with tension as everyone present sensed the approaching point of no return. Let's make history, Prankster Nation. Tyler raised the teacup higher, his movements becoming more theatrical as he played to his camera. Time to find out if these guards are really as disciplined as they claim. His other hand clutched his phone, live streaming what he clearly thought would be his greatest viral moment. Time seemed to slow as Tyler pulled his arm back, the cup of hot tea poised like a weapon in his hand. The crowd collectively held its breath, phones recording from every angle as the moment of crisis arrived. Sunlight glinted off the dark liquid, creating an amber arc as the cup began its journey through the air. "Watch this go viral," Tyler shouted, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent terrace as he launched the tea directly at Staff Sergeant Crawford's face. The steaming liquid spread in a deadly spray, droplets catching the morning light as they hurtled toward the guard's immaculate uniform and exposed skin. What happened next would be analyzed in thousands of slow-motion videos, yet still seem almost impossible to believe. Crawford's right hand moved with a speed that defied human perception, leaving his rifle perfectly balanced in his left hand as he snatched the paper cup from midair. Not a single drop of tea touched his uniform or skin. The movement was so precise, so controlled, that it seemed almost choreographed, except no one could have choreographed something so extraordinary. The crowd gasped collectively, phones still recording as Crawford's hand returned to his rifle with the same fluid grace that had caught the cup. For the first time that morning, his eyes moved, locking directly onto Tyler's face with a gaze that made the social media star physically stumble backward. The sudden silence was deafening. "Oh my God," someone whispered, the words carrying clearly in the stillness. Tyler's phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the cobblestones but still live-streaming his humiliation to hundreds of thousands of viewers. His face had drained of all color, the reality of what he'd just attempted, and how spectacularly it had backfired, finally hitting home. Crawford's voice when it came was like thunder rolling across the terrace. "I believe," he said, each word precisely measured and carrying the weight of centuries, "that this belongs to you." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone carried an authority that made Tyler shrink visibly, his carefully constructed social media persona crumbling in real time. The security officers had finally reached them, but they paused, recognizing that Crawford had the situation well in hand. The guard's presence had transformed while still maintaining his ceremonial stance. He now radiated an authority that commanded the entire space, his years of military service evident in every controlled movement. "In 3 centuries of guarding this castle," Crawford continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent terrace, "we have faced revolution, war, and countless attempts at provocation. Yet here you stand, thinking a cup of tea would accomplish what armies could not." The words landed like precise strikes, each one dismantling Tyler's arrogance with surgical precision. Brigadier General Whitworth had moved to stand behind Tyler, his presence blocking any thought of retreat. Other veterans in the crowd had similarly positioned themselves, forming an impromptu corridor of judgment through which the social media star would soon have to walk. "This uniform," Crawford's words were measured, each one landing like a hammer blow, "represents the sacrifices of generations. The men and women who wore it before me died defending what you mock. This isn't a costume for your entertainment, sir. It's a symbol of duty, honor, and respect, concepts that seem to escape your understanding entirely." Tyler tried to speak, but no words came out. His carefully crafted image of the untouchable prankster had been shattered in seconds by a display of skill and dignity that his followers would be sharing for very different reasons than he'd intended. His entourage had already begun backing away, leaving him to face the consequences alone. "Your name is visible on the cup," Crawford observed, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone that somehow made his words even more devastating. "Along with your social media handles. How convenient for the authorities." He rotated the cup slightly, examining it with exaggerated care. "Tyler Brooks, also known as Prankster King. The Metropolitan Police will be quite interested in this evidence of attempted assault on a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces." Several phones in the crowd chirped with notification sounds. People were already uploading their videos of the incident. "I've sent mine to the police website," a woman called out. Others nodded, their own phones busy uploading evidence of Tyler's misconduct. The hashtag #TKarma was already trending. The seconds following Crawford's intervention seemed suspended in time, as if the very air around Windsor Castle held its breath. Tyler stood frozen, his designer clothes and carefully curated image suddenly seeming absurdly out of place against the ancient stones and centuries of tradition he'd just failed to disrupt. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting every nuance of shock and dismay as his social media empire began crumbling in real time. I was just..." Tyler stammered, his voice barely a whisper. All traces of his previous bravado evaporated like morning mist. His phone continued to live-stream from where it had fallen, broadcasting his humiliation to an audience that had swelled to over 500,000 viewers, drawn by the rapid spread of #TKarma across social media platforms. The cracked screen couldn't stop the flood of notifications, each ping marking another 1,000 shares of his humiliation. Sophie, still monitoring the online response, looked up from her screen with growing alarm. "Tyler, it's gone global. The clips are everywhere. BBC News just picked it up and—" She trailed off as dozens of notifications flooded her phone, major news outlets requesting comments and verification of the incident. Her fingers flew across multiple devices, desperately trying to manage a PR crisis that was already beyond control. Crawford's next movement was a masterclass in military precision. Without breaking his stance, he smoothly secured the captured teacup in his belt, the action so fluid it seemed almost choreographed. His eyes returned to their forward position, but not before giving Tyler one final look that made the influencer visibly wince. The morning light caught his metals once again, each one seeming to shine brighter now, as if celebrating this victory of tradition over disrespect. "Right then," announced the lead security officer, stepping forward with practiced authority. "Mr. Brooks, you'll need to come with us." 2 additional officers had appeared, their presence forming a professional barrier between Tyler and the growing crowd. "We've already received multiple reports of attempted assault, along with quite impressive video evidence from several hundred witnesses." The crowd's reaction was transforming from shocked silence to active participation in Tyler's downfall. Phones remained raised, but now they were capturing his walk of shame rather than his intended viral moment. The sound of hundreds of camera shutters clicking created an almost musical backdrop to his humiliation. Each flash seemed to strip away another layer of his carefully constructed social media persona. "I've got it all in 4K, a professional photographer called out, her professional camera aimed steadily at the unfolding scene. Every second, from the moment he started harassing the guard. Others chimed in, eager to provide their footage, creating a comprehensive digital record of Tyler's foolishness. The morning light was perfect for filming, offering crystal-clear documentation of his downfall from every possible angle. A group of media studies students who had been filming a documentary about Windsor Castle's history quickly redirected their professional-grade cameras to capture the unfolding scene. "This is incredible footage," one whispered to their professor. "It's like watching the exact moment when social media hubris meets real-world consequences." Brigadier General Whitworth stepped forward once more, his military bearing a stark contrast to Tyler's now slumped shoulders. "Perhaps now you understand," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of service. "Why some traditions endure. They're not relics of the past. They're living examples of excellence." His words seemed to resonate through the crowd, drawing murmurs of approval from visitors of all nationalities. The morning sun, now high above the castle walls, cast harsh light on the scene as Tyler was led away by security. His designer clothes, chosen so carefully for their on-camera appeal, now seemed to highlight his disgrace. The brand names that had once represented his success now marked him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of disrespecting tradition. Each step on the ancient cobblestones echoed with the weight of consequences. Marcus, who had captured everything on his professional camera, slowly lowered his equipment. "That's definitely not the viral content we were looking for," he muttered, already anticipating the professional fallout. Several major brands that had sponsored Tyler were already sending urgent messages, their PR teams scrambling to distance themselves from the incident. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications from their management team, each message more panicked than the last. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of languages and accents all sharing the same tone of satisfaction at seeing justice served. A group of Japanese tourists bowed deeply toward Crawford, their guide explaining in hushed tones about the significance of what they'd just witnessed. British visitors nodded approvingly, many filming ceremonial guard documentaries on their phones while discussing the incident with a mix of pride and vindication. "Did you see that catch?" an American tourist exclaimed, replaying his footage in slow motion. It was like something out of a movie, except it was real. His children gathered around his phone, their earlier excitement about castle history now mixed with awe at the display of skill they'd witnessed. The slow-motion replay revealed details that made the catch even more impressive. The perfect timing, the unwavering precision, the absolute control. Sophie's attempts to manage the social media crisis were proving futile. "It's trending #1 worldwide," she reported, her professional composure cracking. "The clips are being edited into compilations, memes are flooding every platform, and—" She paused, checking another notification. The American Embassy just released a statement condemning the behavior of American tourists who disrespect British institutions. Her fingers flew across multiple screens as she tried to contain the damage, but each attempt seemed to only amplify the viral spread of Tyler's humiliation. The security team had begun taking statements from witnesses, their notepads filling quickly as people lined up to provide their accounts. The veteran who had tried to intervene earlier was given particular attention, his military expertise lending additional weight to his testimony about the attempted assault. Other veterans in the crowd stepped forward as well, each adding their professional perspectives to the official record. Tour guides from various companies had paused their regular routes to witness the aftermath, many already incorporating the incident into their narratives about the importance of respecting British traditions. "This," one guide told her group, "is why we emphasize that the Queen's Guard are not tourist attractions. They are serving members of His Majesty's Armed Forces." The castle's official social media team had arrived, documenting the incident with professional detachment while coordinating with royal communications staff. Their presence added an air of institutional gravity to the proceedings, transforming what Tyler had intended as a prank into an official incident that would have lasting consequences. The arrival of the Metropolitan Police marked a shift in the atmosphere from spectacle to serious legal matter. Two uniformed officers approached with practiced efficiency, their presence adding official weight to the situation. Detective Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, a veteran of the Royal Protection Unit, led the response, her expression suggesting she'd seen similar incidents before, though perhaps none quite so spectacularly unsuccessful. "Mr. Brooks," she addressed Tyler formally, her tone professionally neutral but carrying unmistakable authority. "I am Detective Sergeant Mitchell from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Division. We'll need to discuss the events that just occurred, particularly your attempted assault on a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces." She gestured to a colleague who was already cataloging evidence, including the now infamous teacup that Crawford had so deftly caught. Tyler's attempt at his usual casual demeanor crumbled entirely under her professional scrutiny. "It was just content creation," he protested weakly, his voice barely carrying. "I didn't mean to actually—" But the detective cut him off with a raised hand, her patience for social media explanations clearly limited. "Content creation, Mr. Brooks, does not exempt you from the law," she stated firmly, gesturing to the growing collection of evidence. "We've already received over 300 video submissions from witnesses, and that number is climbing by the minute. Your own live stream provides particularly clear documentation of your intentions and actions." The police response had been swift and comprehensive. Forensics officers in their distinctive white coveralls moved methodically through the scene, documenting everything from the exact position where Tyler had stood to the trajectory the teacup had taken. Their cameras flashed continuously, creating a detailed photographic record of the incident site. A police evidence technician carefully bagged the teacup, marking it with precise documentation. Temperature reading from the remaining liquid indicates it was approximately 82 degrees Celsius at time of throwing, he reported, adding to the growing list of aggravating factors in the case. That's hot enough to cause second-degree burns on contact with skin. Another officer was coordinating with castle security to obtain CCTV footage from multiple angles. "We have clear visual coverage from 6 different cameras," he reported to Detective Mitchell, including high-resolution footage of the entire sequence of events leading up to the attempted assault. Detective Sergeant Mitchell continued her preliminary interview, each question methodically dismantling Tyler's remaining bravado. "Your social media accounts show clear premeditation," she noted, reviewing information on her tablet. "Multiple posts over the past week indicating your intention to make history at Windsor Castle. Would you care to explain those?" The castle's head of security, Commander James Blackwood, joined the group with a thick folder of documentation in hand. "We've had Mr. Brooks on our watch list since his arrival," he explained to Detective Mitchell. "Our intelligence unit flagged his social media activity. particularly his history of similar provocative incidents at other historical sites. The Roman Forum incident last month was particularly concerning. "Commander," Mitchell responded, "we'll need full access to your surveillance records and threat assessment reports." She turned to another officer. "Contact the Italian authorities. We'll want their documentation of the Rome incident as well." Sophie, still clutching her array of phones, attempted to intervene. "We have a legal team that handles all our content issues." But the detective's response was immediate and firm. "This is no longer a content issue, miss," Mitchell stated. "This is an active criminal investigation involving attempted assault, harassment of military personnel, and potential violations of royal protection protocols." She gestured to another officer who was already coordinating with the American embassy. The embassy's legal attaché, Richard Hayes, had arrived on scene, his diplomatic credentials marking him as a senior official. "Mr. Brooks," he addressed Tyler with barely concealed disappointment, "this incident has significant implications for your status both here and potentially throughout the European Union." "Your passport, please, Mr. Brooks," Detective Mitchell requested, though it wasn't really a request. As Tyler fumbled in his designer jacket, she continued, "The Home Office has been notified. They take a particularly dim view of foreign nationals attempting to assault military personnel for social media fame." A senior Crown Prosecution Service representative had arrived, carrying a thick portfolio of relevant legal precedents. "The attempted assault of a Queen's Guard carries significant penalties," she explained, consulting her documents. "Under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act, combined with the special provisions regarding military personnel on active duty, we're looking at potential penalties including significant fines, travel restrictions, and possible custodial sentences." The evidence collection continued with methodical precision. Every piece of electronic equipment was being cataloged and sealed in forensic bags. "We'll need all your devices, Mr. Brooks," Detective Mitchell stated. "Phones, cameras, storage devices, everything. They're now evidence in an ongoing investigation." She turned to his entourage. "That includes all equipment used by your support team." Marcus silently surrendered his professional camera, knowing the footage it contained would soon be part of legal proceedings rather than viral content. The police tech unit was already working to secure and preserve the livestream footage, along with all associated metadata. Commander Blackwood consulted his security protocols. "Given the nature of the incident, we'll need to implement full visitor screening procedures," he announced. "All entrance points are now on elevated alert status." Additional security personnel had appeared, their presence subtle but effective in controlling the growing crowd of onlookers. The American Embassy's senior consular officer, Patricia Reynolds, had joined the scene, her expression grave. "Mr. Brooks, this incident falls under several international protocols," she explained. "The embassy's ability to intervene will be limited, given the clear video evidence and the number of witnesses." Detective Mitchell was now coordinating with European law enforcement liaisons. "Interpol has been notified," she informed her colleagues. "Given Mr. Brooks's history of similar incidents at other historical sites, they're particularly interested in establishing a pattern of behavior." The legal implications continued to multiply as more authorities became involved. Representatives from the Ministry of Defense had arrived, their presence indicating the seriousness with which the military viewed attacks on its personnel, even when disguised as social media pranks. The ripple effect of Tyler's failed stunt spread through social media with explosive speed. Within an hour of the incident, Yesta Royal Guard Justice and Dr. T. Karma had become the top trending topics worldwide. Video clips of Crawford's lightning-fast catch and measured response were being shared millions of times across every major platform, each new share adding to Tyler's mounting public humiliation. Major news networks had dispatched reporters to Windsor Castle, their satellite vans now lining the approaches. BBC News had already begun broadcasting live from the scene, their veteran royal correspondent providing context about the significance of the Queen's Guard and the severity of Tyler's actions. "What we witnessed today," the correspondent explained to a global audience, "was not just an attempted assault on a guard, but an attack on centuries of tradition and respect." Behind her, crowds continued to gather, many holding up phones to show they had footage of the incident. Social media analytics firms reported unprecedented engagement levels. "We're seeing a complete reversal of the typical influencer narrative," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a digital media expert hastily interviewed by CNN. "Instead of the prankster gaining followers, we're watching real-time accountability play out across all platforms." Tyler's carefully cultivated online empire was crumbling by the minute. Major brands began issuing public statements distancing themselves from him. Energy Cycle Drink stands firmly against any disrespect shown to military personnel, read one typical corporate response. "We have terminated all associations with Mr. Brooks, effective immediately." The Castle gift shop reported a surge in visitors asking for information about the Queen's Guard, with many expressing particular interest in Staff Sergeant Crawford's unit. "People want to know more about the real soldiers behind the ceremonial uniforms," the shop manager explained to a reporter. "This incident has sparked genuine interest in military service and tradition." Military veterans organizations seized the moment to educate the public. The Royal British Legion's social media accounts shared informative posts about the Queen's Guard's dual role as both ceremonial guards and active duty soldiers. "Today's incident demonstrates why we select only our finest soldiers for this honor," their statement read. Tourism industry representatives held an impromptu press conference near the castle gates. "This incident demonstrates exactly why we emphasize respectful behavior at all our historical sites," explained the head of the British Tourism Authority. "These are not theme parks. They are living, working institutions deserving of proper respect." Educational institutions began incorporating the incident into their teaching materials. "This is a perfect case study in the clash between traditional values and social media culture," noted Dr. James Harrison, a professor of media studies at Oxford. "It will be discussed in classrooms for years to come." The Japanese Tourism Association issued guidelines to their tour operators worldwide, using the incident as an example of cultural respect. Their official statement praised Staff Sergeant Crawford's professionalism, while emphasizing the importance of understanding and respecting local traditions and institutions. Inside the castle grounds, visitors' behavior had noticeably shifted. People maintained respectful distances from the guards, many parents using the incident as a teaching moment for their children. "See how still they stand," one mother was overheard explaining. "That's what real discipline looks like." Security experts began analyzing Crawford's catch in slow motion, with many noting the exceptional level of training it demonstrated. "That movement wasn't just reflexes," explained former SAS Commander William Davies on Sky News. "That was years of combat experience and discipline manifesting in a split second." Social media companies found themselves under pressure to address prank culture. Platform representatives faced difficult questions about their role in encouraging disruptive behavior for views and likes. Several announced immediate policy reviews regarding content that disrespected cultural institutions or military personnel. The incident sparked broader discussions about social media influence and responsibility. Think pieces appeared in major newspapers with titles like "When Followers Lead to Foolishness" and "The Real Cost of Viral Fame." Cultural critics began examining the wider implications of sacrificing respect for online attention. The formal legal proceedings against Tyler Brooks unfolded with swift efficiency in the Westminster Magistrates' Court. The courtroom, with its polished wood panels and centuries of legal tradition, provided a fitting backdrop for justice being served. Tyler's designer clothes had been replaced by a conservative suit that seemed to swallow his diminished presence. "The Crown views this offense with particular severity," the prosecutor declared, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. "The evidence demonstrates not just premeditated intent to assault a serving member of His Majesty's Armed Forces, but a calculated attempt to monetize that disrespect for social media profit." She methodically presented the overwhelming evidence: hundreds of witness videos, CCTV footage, Tyler's own live stream, and his history of similar provocations at other historical sites. The judge's response was unequivocal. "Mr. Brooks," he began, his tone carrying centuries of legal authority, "your actions represent a troubling intersection of disrespect and digital age hubris. The court cannot ignore the premeditated nature of your attempt to assault Staff Sergeant Crawford, nor your clear intention to profit from such disgraceful behavior. The penalties were comprehensive. A £50,000 fine was just the beginning. The court imposed a 5-year ban from entering the United Kingdom, with similar restrictions quickly adopted by other European nations. Tyler's social media accounts, the source of his former influence and income, were ordered permanently suspended for violating multiple platform policies regarding harassment and harmful behavior. Back in Los Angeles, Tyler's management agency publicly terminated their relationship. In light of recent events, their statement read, "Brooks Media LLC no longer represents Mr. Tyler Brooks. We remain committed to promoting responsible content creation that respects cultural institutions and traditional values." Other agencies quickly followed suit, leaving Tyler professionally isolated. The corporate exodus was equally swift. Within days, every major brand partnership had been canceled. Sponsorship deals worth millions evaporated, with companies rushing to distance themselves from the toxic association. His merchandise line was pulled from shelves, and his upcoming book deal about social media success was canceled by the publisher. Staff Sergeant Crawford, meanwhile, found himself the recipient of unexpected recognition. The Ministry of Defense awarded him a commendation for exemplary service, citing his exceptional display of discipline and restraint in the face of deliberate provocation. His handling of the incident became required viewing at military training facilities, demonstrating the perfect balance of readiness and restraint. The incident sparked lasting changes in social media policy. Major platforms implemented stricter guidelines regarding content filmed at historical and military sites. Prank videos targeting uniformed personnel became grounds for immediate account suspension. Content creators found themselves navigating a new landscape where respect for institutions carried more weight than potential viral fame. Windsor Castle updated its visitor protocols, implementing enhanced screening procedures and clearer guidelines about appropriate behavior. Signs now prominently displayed warnings about the legal consequences of harassing the Queen's Guard, with Tyler's case cited as a specific example of zero tolerance for disrespectful conduct. Educational institutions incorporated the incident into their media studies curricula. The Brooks case, as it became known in academic circles, appeared in textbooks as a cautionary tale about the intersection of social media fame and cultural respect. Professors used it to spark discussions about digital ethics and the real-world consequences of online behavior. The tourism industry also evolved in response. Major tour operators worldwide developed new training modules for their guides, emphasizing the importance of cultural respect and the real role of ceremonial guards. Japanese tourism companies particularly embraced this approach, making respect for local traditions a cornerstone of their tour guide training. Tyler's former followers underwent their own transformation. Many posted public apologies for having encouraged his previous provocative behavior. Fan pages converted into discussion forums about responsible content creation and cultural respect. The hashtag #RespectNotViews became a rallying cry for a new generation of social media users seeking to create content without crossing ethical lines. The incident's impact extended beyond social media. Military recruitment offices reported increased interest, particularly in the Queen's Guard, as young people were drawn to the profound dignity Crawford had displayed. Veterans organizations used the moment to educate the public about the dual nature of ceremonial units, as both guardians of tradition and highly trained military professionals. 1 year after the infamous tea incident at Windsor Castle, its impact continued to resonate throughout both traditional and social media spheres. What had begun as an attempted prank had transformed into a watershed moment in the ongoing dialogue between traditional values and modern digital culture. Staff Sergeant Crawford's masterful response had become legendary within military circles. Training academies worldwide now use the footage as a perfect example of military bearing under pressure. "What we witnessed that day," explained Colonel James Harrison at Sandhurst Military Academy, "was centuries of tradition and training crystallized into a single moment of excellence." The incident had sparked a lasting transformation in social media culture. Content creators who had once chased viral fame through increasingly outrageous stunts found themselves navigating a changed landscape. Respect, rather than rebellion, had become the new currency of online influence. Major platforms had permanently altered their algorithms to deprioritize prank content, targeting cultural institutions or uniformed personnel. Documentary filmmakers had produced several in-depth analyses of the incident. The BBC's Guardians of Tradition explored the deeper significance of the Queen's Guard in modern society, featuring interviews with former guards and cultural historians. The film's most powerful moment came from Crawford himself in his first and only public interview about the incident. "The uniform isn't about the individual wearing it," Crawford explained, his quiet dignity apparent even in civilian clothes. "It represents every soldier who's ever stood watch, every sacrifice made in service to the crown. When someone disrespects this uniform, they're not just challenging one guard. They're attempting to diminish centuries of dedicated service." Windsor Castle had experienced its own evolution. Visitor behavior showed a marked change, with tourists demonstrating notably more respect toward the guards and the institution they represented. Tour guides reported increased interest in the genuine military role of the Queen's Guard, moving beyond the superficial attraction of the ceremonial uniform. The academic world had embraced the incident as a rich source of study. Universities offered courses analyzing the intersection of social media culture and traditional institutions. The Crawford moment, as it became known in academic circles, appeared in textbooks discussing digital ethics, cultural respect, and the consequences of online behavior. Tyler Brooks's cautionary tale had lasting implications. His attempted rise to viral fame had instead become a powerful lesson in accountability. After serving his ban and paying his fines, he emerged as an unexpected advocate for digital responsibility, speaking at schools about the real costs of social media recklessness. The tourism industry had undergone its own transformation. Major tour operators worldwide now included specific training about respectful behavior at ceremonial sites. The Japanese Tourism Association had been particularly proactive, developing comprehensive guidelines that were adopted globally as industry standards. Military recruitment saw an unexpected boost, particularly in ceremonial units. Young people drawn to the quiet strength Crawford had displayed sought to emulate his example. The Queen's Guard reported a surge in applications, with many candidates citing the tea incident as their inspiration for serving. Veterans organizations had effectively used the moment to bridge generational gaps. They developed educational programs helping young people understand the dual nature of ceremonial units as both guardians of tradition and highly trained military professionals. These programs became regular features in schools across Britain and beyond. The incident's impact on social media influence was profound and lasting. Content creators discovered that respectful, informative content about military traditions and historical sites could generate more genuine engagement than provocative pranks. A new genre of educational content emerged, celebrating rather than challenging institutional traditions. Legal frameworks evolved to address similar challenges. The Crawford Protocol became shorthand for enhanced penalties regarding social media-motivated harassment of uniformed personnel. Other countries adopted similar measures, creating a unified response to digital age provocations of traditional institutions. The gift shop at Windsor Castle still sold more copies of the official guard handbook than any other item. Visitors often requested information about Crawford's unit, seeking to understand the real story behind the ceremonial facade. The incident had transformed tourist interest from superficial photography to genuine appreciation of military service. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.